appreciate it.
Sure. Oh, and there's our recording. And I so appreciate you being able to come on. I had the honor and the privilege of being on Jen's show, and that's how we met in one of the Facebook groups. And we were just kind of chatting as we're getting ready to go live today of, our own experiences with podcast, and being on her show was so much fun. You made it really warm and comforting, and I think it's always, I've talked about this before. It's sort of like blind dating when you're doing podcasts. Like you're just like, you can't really swipe left or right and the person's there, so you just kind of like take a leap of faith. But we had a really fun and powerful and beautiful discussion about not just mental health, but also our own experiences about traveling and experience and culture. And so I was so excited when you were able to fit us in and join us tonight. So I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you. Yeah, for my podcast, I have 2 volunteers, which they are like, my podcast wouldn't exist without them. And they listened to our episode and they were like, Jenn, what does travel have anything to do with anger? And I was like, if you don't talk and work up to the deep discussions and build that vulnerability and that, trust, you can't have those deep conversations. And now so many people are grateful for that. And I appreciate you going there with me, because it was such a fun part of it, yet the nitty gritty of talking about anger I learned so much when you were on the show.
Right. Oh, I'm so glad. And I think sometimes that's the organic beauty of doing a podcast and doing a video show and seeing where the conversation goes. And even when you have like a preconceived idea of what you want to talk about, I think that's where the magic comes from, is what comes when we're dancing together to create a good show. Now, shit you don't want to talk about. Can you tell me a little bit of how that came into creation?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. So I have, since I was a little girl, I have had this drive for human connection. It honestly could have been from the solitary confinement. It could have been from moving around so much. I can't put an exact pinpoint on it, but all I've always wanted to do is create human connection, talk to people. Why is this person not talking to this person, and they talk about the same things? They should be friends. And I've done that my entire life. And in 2016, a woman named Dunya and I started a podcast called Greater Than. And it was about homelessness, sex trafficking. We also talked about racial bias, and this was before Black Lives Matter movement. And it was quite the experience. And Dunya came from the journalism background. I came from the I'm a spaz and just curious about everybody background. And we had such a good time, but it could only be one season. So it's always been in the back of my head that this is something I've always wanted to do, yet I never had the courage to do it myself, or the know-how to take care of myself to be able to put that energy out in the world, because it can be really hard to have these conversations time and time again. And when I would describe Greater Than, is I was like, yeah, it was a podcast that shit you don't want to talk about. And that's how I came up with the name for this one. Is it literally is.
Yes.
So far this season, we've talked about imposter syndrome, men's mental health, vulnerability, intersectionality, code switching, caregiving, being like on both ends of it, of being a caregiver and receiving care. And it's all divorce. I can't even name them all. Like I have 11 episodes out so far.
Oh, that's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. And what really happened is I've gone through 3 or 4 personal development courses throughout my life. And a big part of it was, in each of them, I kept growing a bit more and learning who I was. And I turned to personal development courses because I have been to 20 plus therapists that were absolutely awful.
Mhm.
They didn't connect. I have a magic power of getting to know others more than they know me, not as a deflection, but as a I knew from moving around so much that if I could get to know people, they would like me if I got them
Mhm.
talking about themselves.
Mhm.
And I have an innate curiosity. So they would just feed into each other.
Mhm. Mhm.
And having a therapist not know much about you and you know everything about your therapist doesn't really make you trust them to talk to you about your shit.
Right.
So I did personal development courses, and they really made me start to find, okay, this is weird. Like, why human connection? Like, I feel so weird. I feel like I'm the most awkward person in the world. Why human connection? Like with a suicide attempt, why does human connection matter?
Mhm.
With self harm in my past, why does human connection matter? Like with being sexually abused and raped, why does human connection matter? Why do I keep going back to it over and over and over again? And these courses really, really helped with being able to be in a relationship and love myself to be in a relationship. I've been in a very healthy relationship for about 5 years now.
Mhm.
And what I realized was still happening was that the toxic relationships that I used to be in are now just showing up at work, like my
Mhm.
bosses, or
Mhm.
being overworked, or putting in too much, or allowing myself to be undervalued. And I always saw my worth in my work until I had to have brain surgery.
Mhm.
I had to take time off.
Mhm.
There was nothing I could do. I had to take a month off. And it was one of the most humbling experiences. But what they don't tell you, and there's not a lot of research on it, is so my surgery was right over my right temple.
Okay.
I have about a golf ball size cyst there, an
Okay.
arachnoid cyst. It is benign. So normally you can have arachnoid cysts on your brain and they can just chill there. They don't cause any issues. Your brain learns to get around it. So it's like whatever.
Mhm.
Mine caused pressure.
Mhm.
So like I would get incredible headaches that what they chose to do is if they drained the cyst, it would come back. No,
Okay.
like it will always come back.
Mhm.
So what they decided to do was the fancy word is fenestration to the ventricle something and another. No, I'm not a doctor. Basically, there's an area that your brain naturally has fluid, and they just made a little like scar tunnel
Oh,
to be able to
wow.
let it drain. Um, and then they stapled me back up, and they're like, "Cool, you're good to go." What they didn't realize, nor did I know, is all of your long-term memories are stored on this side of your brain.
Mhm.
So when I had my surgery, I had always had a really hard time with my mental health, and I thought I was fine until I had surgery. And all of that shit decided to, come up this year.
And say hello.
And yeah, it was like, yo, Jen, what's up? Let's be friends. I don't want to be friends with them, but it wants to be friends with me.
Right.
And it was kind of crazy because I also was miserable at work and I hired a career coach. And funny enough, it wasn't even a job I applied for. It was, my network and people seeing over time the work that I did that got me the job that I have now. And I absolutely love my job. It pushes me. I'm at a startup. I'm a learning services manager. That's what I do full time.
Mhm.
I'm the architect of the training program as well as the content creator. So I like to call myself a full-time content creator. I do it for work
I
and I
love
do it for the
that.
podcast. Um,
That's
but
awesome.
it's definitely where work made me deal with a lot of deep dark emotions that I didn't know I had, that I had to go to therapy this year. And I
Mhm.
met my therapist and it was kind of funny. We it's COVID, so we met over Zoom, and we get on the call, and she's a young woman. I'm like 33, so I say young because she looks younger than me, and
Mhm.
she has tattoos absolutely everywhere. She has like this cool drape, like blanket type thing in the back, and I'm just like, So she seems cool. And I tell her, I'm like, okay, like this is the thing I do with therapists. I always get to know them better than I know like they know me. And she's like, well, cool, I'm not telling you shit. She's like, I don't care if you ask me, I'm not telling you. And I'm like,
that's amazing.
And so we started the EMDR. You and I talked about that a bit. Which, okay, we'll see if I remember what it is. Movement desensitization repetition.
Reprocessing. Yep.
Reprocessing. Damn it.
Hey, you did it 3 out of 4. That's really good.
And I told her about all the shit that I have gone through. So my bio said it, and the way I like to explain it is basically solitary confinement, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, intellectual abuse, rape, suicide attempts, abortion, marriage, divorce, moved 33 times, death of a friend, like I got the gambit. There's definitely it's definitely not a competition, but I was like, there's shit that I just haven't dealt with. And I think I've dealt with it, but it's definitely now showing up in my body. And so she took the time. And from my understanding, not all for EMDR, you don't have to go through all of your past history as much to start it, because you don't have to know all the deepest, darkest stuff of it. You can start by just knowing like high level. And she took 6 months to help me work through it. So she knew the ins and outs of it, because she could see that I detached myself really, really hard from this stuff. And the way that would show up in my life is if something would happen, so something very difficult would happen, I'll be fine through that. And then it could be like a month later, you look at me funny, I'm going to cry. And it was very displaced. So she took the time to get to know me much better. And during that process, I told my boss at work, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to start a podcast about sales. And she's like, no, you're not. That's too close to your job. I'm like, oh, okay. And she's like, why don't you start a podcast about mental health? You've posted tons of videos about it. And I was like, why didn't I think of that? So as I'm still on my own journey with my mental health, it just made sense. And it was just this notion of, if we can get people to talk about this shit and really dig deep and share their stories, so we don't feel so alone, so we can get perspectives from the other side. I just recorded an episode earlier this week about a mother who has a transgender son, and she helps other parents support their transgender children. And I asked her some of the most awkward questions, but they're questions that a lot of us have.
Right.
And it helps a lot with connecting and seeing that human side of it.
And it helps combat that shame that keeps so many people stuck.
Yes. And that's why I started the podcast. I know that was a very long answer to you ask me why I started my podcast, but there's a lot that went into it.
Yeah, and I think that's really a beautiful response, because it's genuine. Some people say, they wake up one day and they're like, okay, I want a podcast, and that's fine too. But there are other people, you've taken your pain, your loss, your resiliency, and your hope, not only for yourself, but one of the things that I've learned getting to know you and see the work you do is so you can pay it forward. So not only can you just have connections with other people, but so you can give them all a platform that they may not have in other ways.
Yeah, I really want people that historically have not been invited to the table. I don't want them just to have a seat at the table. I want them to be like, you got a permanent spot here, and invite your friend. Like, we're going to have like the biggest table in the world.
Right.
And I will say one thing that I definitely want to say that impacted starting a podcast. And this is something that I still struggle with. It's not something that's as black and white and as easy and beautiful. It's something that I'm currently working through in therapy. And it's the fact that my dad is the one that suggested I make podcasts.
Hmm.
He heard about Robin Williams was on a podcast, and he just passed away in 20, I think that was 2014, 2015. And my dad's like, you should do a podcast. And it's hard for me to deal with because I love doing this,
Hmm.
yet knowing that my dad had that impact on my life when he's also been the cause of so much pain
Hmm.
is really, really hard to deal with.
Hmm.
So there's still this joy that I get out of doing the podcast, and still this like strength that I'm starting to find,
Hmm.
because I know that it's not, I don't have my dad to blame for it. I also don't have him to, my success isn't because of him.
Right.
It's my own success. And that is something that I do want to share, because it's not always as pretty behind the scenes as people may think it is. It's my life is fucking messy. Oh, are we allowed to cuss?
It's okay. Yeah, you're good. Friday night feels filter free.
Great. Great. I mean, I would think people would know I cuss because my podcast has a cuss word in it. And I just found out I need to figure this out for Facebook. Facebook won't let me promote my videos because it has profanity
Mm.
in it. And I'm like,
There's got
because
to be a
it's,
loophole.
yeah, it's part of my logo. So I'm like,
Oh,
what do I
ugh.
do?
Facebook's weird, or is it Meta now? I don't even know.
Right?
The computers are
Yeah.
taking over. Well, that's funny you mentioned that because every time I upload an episode to YouTube, they're always like, "Is this child appropriate?" Sometimes I'm like, "Sure," but then it's nice to be able to put that of like, "No, this one's for adults."
Yeah. I was just like, yo, no, it's not child appropriate. And I think when I did the intro of my podcast, and then my partner re-recorded it for me because he has a much cooler voice than I do. um, and I just basically am like, yo, if you're under the age of 13, ask your parents.
Yeah.
Parents, if your kids are asking you to listen to it, it's not a great topic, but it's probably worth talking to your kids about.
Well, and that I think is what's powerful. I'm glad that you put that out there is because where else are kids? Like not that kids have to learn it from us, but for parents to know, hey, this is something your kids are going to want to talk about.
Hmm. They're
I
gonna
just had
go
it.
look it up anyway.
Right. And why not have, so I was having a conversation with someone about, like with mental health, healthy sexual relationships and different things like that, and how difficult it is in the mental health field to really know sometimes where those boundaries are of, well, I'm not a sex educator, but you're presenting with some concerning issues, so we can refer out, but can we just have a conversation about this of, especially if there's a history of trauma, sometimes there's a lack of knowledge of really what's healthy, what's appropriate for you and your partners, but also scientifically and health based what's accurate and what isn't. I don't know about you, but I was having a conversation with someone about this the other day of when we were teenagers, the ridiculous information that would be passed of about sex and about all these different things. And I remember talk about awkward. I remember being little and being afraid of kissing because of the Brady Bunch. Because if you remember the episode, the whole measles episode, I'm like, oh my God, you're gonna get the measles if you kiss someone.
That's so funny.
So, just like that ignorance we have as kids, but being able to turn it into adults of, maybe like my focus isn't for kids, but it's to help adults who maybe have kids in their lives and just kind of being able to talk about, like you're saying, I think it's really awesome that you had that parent on there because transgender issues have to be talked about. They have to be taken out of the shame. There's so much violence. There's so much hatred and lies being spread about it that the more people we have talking about it, we can help hopefully prevent more of that violence from occurring.
Yeah. And to your point about talking to it about kids, like my sexual abuse happened from the age of 8 to 10, which is such a point in a child's life where, like, so the developmental years. And by the age of 14, and probably till the age of like, my late 20s, I thought my worth was in promiscuity. See if I can say the word today, promiscuity. And it's like no one took the time to have this conversation with me and help me break through this so much earlier, that's why I'm like, maybe I would have refused to listen to this podcast when I was 14, but at least someone could have tried.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to be able to help prevent maybe some of the pain that people go through.
Yeah. And I wish it's kind of weird because a lot of people are like, so who's your niche? And I'm like, well, or niche, however you say that word.
Yeah. I think we need to create a new one because everyone has the same cup.
Niche.
Yeah.
Niche. And I'm like, well, humans. And they're like, no, you got to narrow it down more than that. I'm like, humans, just humans, because we got to talk about this shit. It's, and it is something that I'm looking forward to someday. As we talked about in when you were on my show, is the cultures and being able to share this across cultures. And especially after our episode, I'm like, I really should start looking into like getting a Spanish teacher or something and actually like double down on this sometime so I can actually start talking in another language.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, and we also had to plan our trip. Didn't we talk about that?
Yes.
Machu Picchu, right?
Yes. That's going to be so fun.
Oh my God, giddy up. We could do, what is it called, on site or on, when they do a show or something, like on location.
There we go. Let's do it. It's going to be
That is a write-off. Oh my God, yes.
Even better. It'll be
see the creative juices. They're flowing. But that would be fun one day, like to be able to go somewhere else and just say, we're literally here. We're not just in the hobbit hole.
Yeah, I've actually put it out there in the world that I actually want to do a tour of the East Coast because I have so many friends on the East Coast. And I'm like, I want to be able to do public speaking events. So that way they start to like pay for themselves while I'm out there, like visiting everyone. Yeah. So, for listeners out there putting it out in the world, universe, please help me out with this.
Yes.
Because I really do believe, and I know this is a little woo-woo, but like when you set intentions out in the world and when you work towards something, the universe just kind of like helps you figure it out.
Yeah. Yes. And I think it's important, and this is my experience, where sometimes that means no.
Yes, 100%, 100%.
I think we're so deterred or disappointed or angry when it's no, but then and I know I get in it and I let myself have my little tantrum. I let myself feel frustrated, but I just put it out there. I know I'm going through my tantrum, but I know this is going to work out. And then afterwards, you kind of feel like a fool, like, oh man, I really wish I had just believed more that it would work out, because sometimes it's not supposed to.
Yeah. I mean, I can say that I am so grateful for all the times that I wanted exes to work out. And I'm like, thank God that they did it, because they were not as awesome as my partner now. And he's my human and I don't want to trade him for anything. So that's just like one moment that I just like, is very grounding for me when I'm like, oh, but it didn't work out. Yeah, it didn't work out because something else was better.
Right. And there was more. I was destined for more. And I think that takes that judgment out of it, of it's okay that we want more, because then we grow and we develop and we want someone, whether it's a friend, a partner, a boss, whatever it is, people in our lives, we want them to be able to grow with us. And I don't think we talk about that enough. Like when we're growing, not only do we need people who are supportive, we need people who are hungry for life like we are.
So, because you're a therapist and I'm not, now I have questions. I mean, this is your show, but so curious. Um, this has actually been an experience in my life of like when I've grown, my certain parts of my family may not grow with me, or my friends may not grow with me. And like, you're right, we don't talk about that shit. And like, how do you like what are you supposed to do with it? Because it's almost heartbreaking when you're losing people by bettering yourself.
Yes. And then it depends on how it works. If it just sort of melts away naturally and you're
Hmm.
like, okay, hey, how are you? But when there's bitterness, that's a whole other thing of resentment. It's like it's like it's okay that we outgrow each other. It's okay that we want different things. But I think we have to do the work to be honest with ourselves. And then if they do ask, to be able to be honest, but it's like, how do you break up with a friendship? How do you, when they haven't done anything wrong? I think is really painful. And what I try to do is just to be as genuine and not saying it's always easy, but as genuine and transparent as you can be. And I think once again, the universe kind of takes your hand and guides you to where you need to be.
Yeah, I would I think that's a big difference that I've seen just with my parents. They got divorced when I was younger, like 12ish. We're gonna give or take a year or two. Um, and my mom has always grown with me. Like I don't think I ever realized that till a couple years ago, but we still have a very strong relationship. And where my dad is still like the same human he was when I was a kid, and chance after chance after chance after chance. And it's heartbreaking, yet me learning to give that distance
Mm-hmm.
because, yes, he may be blood, yet that pain isn't worth it for me. And I mean, it's every person's journey is different. And accepting to myself and being like, Jen, you're worth being loved, not treated like this.
Mm-hmm.
And going, he didn't want to grow with me. So peace.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't need to change him. And if we can't have like, enough boundaries that make a working relationship, then, choosing to be like, cool, you do your thing, I'll do mine. Good
Mm-hmm.
luck.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that I don't think a lot of people really talk about is the boundaries within our families,
Mm-hmm.
that there's so many different levels. Like I have a friend where she has really good boundaries with her parents because her parents are alcoholics, that she knows she only calls them in the morning before they start drinking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And but when her parents call her, she doesn't answer because she knows they're drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, and so she's able to still do that. And that's beautiful. That's not something I'd be able to do with my dad, but I'm so happy for her. And it's those type of examples that when I hear about them, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe that will teach me something later on too.
Mm-hmm. I think as you're saying this, the one word that comes up to me, especially with families, obligation.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And I think it's one of the most devastating words and abusive words, because there's a difference between an obligation, like I have a work obligation, or I have to go to that picnic, or I gotta, pay my bills. That's different. When there's an emotionally manipulative relationship,
Hmm.
that's a whole other ball of wax. When I feel, and I remember I was reading a book about narcissism, and it was giving examples from business relationships, professional, platonic, and family. And one of the components they were talking about was obligation. And I had never really just stopped and integrated, have I ever felt obligated to do something? And it was a life-changing moment for me that continuously grows of, am I doing something because I want to, or am I doing something out of obligation because I'm afraid something bad will happen if I don't?
I just want to like pause there and sit with that because I think that's something that so many people don't think of.
Great. And then I'm just gonna like throw it back to you is with your experiences as well, especially going through so much abuse and trying to have a human connection, that need to comply almost with some relationships must have played out at some point in your experiences of or has it, would you say? Like, have you ever
Um,
experienced obligation in your relationships? Sorry, that was a muddy way to get to the question, but
no, you're good. You're good. I followed. Yes, I would say it was also not necessarily, I don't know as much of, okay, yes, obligation fell into my need to feel worth.
okay.
So it wasn't necessarily the obligation that was my issue. It was, I felt like if I did X, Y, and Z, they would love me.
Mm-hmm.
And, that honestly, I mean, their version of love is totally different, but I didn't feel loved.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a very, very big difference. I mean, there are times even now that I'm like, I'm obligated to do things, and I'm like, is it worth fighting with them over it? Or can I just back out? And a lot of it that I've learned quite a bit is the fact that I have become a lot more honest with people, including my family now. And it also is learning to be more honest with myself. Am I backing out because I'm feeling lazy, or am I backing out because I need space?
Mm-hmm.
And that took me a long time to learn, in the fact of, uh, a lot of people throughout my life have always told me that I'm extroverted. And if you're extroverted, you're supposed to be able to go out and be energized by crowds and want to go do stuff all the time and be kind of go, go, go. I'm honestly really introverted.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm outgoing and I can talk to anyone and I can carry a conversation. My curiosity really fuels that. But when I get done recording an episode or being on a podcast or working on a work meeting or something, I have to go take a nap
Mm-hmm.
because I am so emotionally drained.
Mm-hmm.
And that has taken me a long time to figure out, because I thought it was like a physical, like a medical issue. When I found
Mm-hmm.
out that it was just, and started keeping track of it, I realized it was oh, Jen, you just need to recoup. You need a little rest. You can take care of you and still be able to give to others. Where is, if I push myself through that, I'm not 100% there, and I
Mm-hmm.
start to resent even myself for saying yes without taking those like little breaks.
Mm-hmm. And then I think also we have to remind ourselves when we're talking about our pain, even when we're doing well in the present, that it's reopening the wound.
That's an awkward laugh in the fact that poor Tyler. I've gone through a lot of shit,
Right.
and I'm going through therapy. Therapy, it doesn't always come up in therapy. It can come up that evening. It can come up a week later. It can come up when he gave me a hug and I'm going to freak the fuck out suddenly because I have no idea. And
Right.
on that note, it's like, he is one of the most patient humans I have ever met, and always has made me feel so secure and can trust him to get through this and trust myself. It's also that I've always hated the fact that it's not predictable,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm going through this and I'm working on myself and I'm doing it for the podcast, for this myself, and working on, so it's healthier in our relationship down the road. Yet it's so hard because I end up taking so much, because I don't know when they're going to show up. I also don't know what's necessarily causing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes us a while to discuss, and I'm not always the nicest person when this happens. And it takes a lot out of him, which is really, really hard when I know, like, I don't want to take all of this and I don't want to necessarily work through this, but we both know working through this, yes, it'll be a lifelong journey, but getting into this nitty gritty right now is really hard, yet it's going to help in the long run. It's just the unpredictability that I really struggle with.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, and I'm glad you brought that up. Of this work, being in therapy, no matter what level, no matter what you're doing, is hard work. And people think, well, you're just going to go talk. It's like, this isn't just talk, it's reliving, it's bringing up pain, it's challenging ourselves, it's learning how to slow the hell down and say, wow, there's a lot of dysfunction going on. I need to understand this. So that way I don't end up breaking, or I don't break someone, and I don't continue the cycle that I've lived in for so long. So I think kind of what you were saying a few minutes ago is giving yourself that dignity and that compassion of, you need to rest because you deserve it.
Yeah, and that honestly took a really long time. Like, and I know I mentioned my self-development courses earlier. I've taken the first ones I took were through You and Improved, which is based out of Phoenix. The next one that I took was it's called Starting Block, and it's for social good, and that one was worldwide. I'm not really sure how it's been affected with COVID. One that's very, very popular is Landmark Forum, and I went through their first 3 courses. And then the last one I took was with a dating coach called Matthew Hussey, and it's a women's retreat.
Okay.
And it was interesting in each of them. I learned something about myself, yet it was so difficult because it sounds weird, but I wasn't where I am right now. Like, I wanted to be comfortable in myself. I wanted to know my worth and trust myself. And that didn't happen until this year. I'm 33, I think. I think I'm 33. Well, I'll ask my mom later or do the math. And so it's been only this last year, and it's taken me so long to work through all of this. The very first course I took was, people told me that I have this way of bringing people together. And I was like, that's weird. No, I don't. The next one was being able to see patterns and how these groups had to work together to solve this problem, and getting that right and going. And people are like going, Jen, really good job on figuring that out. Like, you did a great job. Like, you're really smart. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And then the next one is, this one was really hard. It was a group where, let's say a group of 10, and only you pretend that all of you are on a boat, and you have to look each person in the eye and tell them you live or you die. And you can only choose 2 people to live out of, like, when you go around the group. And so I was one of the 2 people that were chosen to live, like, by everybody going around. And they're like, cool, pretend that if you're the only survivor, write a letter of what you're going to do in your life and how you're going to do better in your life because of you're the survivor to live for everyone
that's intense.
else. Oh yeah, like it fucking sucked. And I just remember I couldn't write anything because I was like, why did I live? I shouldn't have lived. Somebody else deserves to live. And that really, really hit me hard because one of my best friends died in high school, and I felt the same way there. And then in the next self-development group, it was sharing my story and how I wanted to do like some type of thing and have groups and have people to come together, and people listen to it. And they're like, Jenn, you should really do that. And I'm like, no, it doesn't make any sense. And then when they have you like visualize the future, I'm like, I don't know. I barely think I can get through tomorrow. And then the very next one, it's where learning it is what it is. Like, we put the meaning behind something happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, it was the very, very first time I called out someone on their shit, which was terrifying to me. And yet I love those truth conversations of, yo, bro, you're taking advantage of everybody else. Like, either get your shit together or like, fuck off. Like, why are you doing this? I mean, like, I was shaking. Like, I never had the balls to have that conversation. And everybody's like, Jenn, you're going to make such like a big impact on life. I'm like, no, I'm not. You're crazy. And then the next one,
catching a theme here, Jenn.
Yeah, right. Like,
you're consistent.
Yeah. And then the next one was, we had to do a project of some type, and I wanted to do a video at work, and everybody's like, this is such a good idea. You're going to do it. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm too scared to ask anybody. And it happened. And I was like, blah. Okay. And then it was the very last one. So it took me going through all of those to go where in the last one with Matthew Hussey, they have you do like a visualization of going back when you're a child and being there with yourself as you're going through your hardest moments, telling yourself what you needed to hear during your hardest moments. And it was that made me really click that there's a difference between confidence and worth, and I'm worth it. And it made me be able to be in the relationship that I'm in because I didn't believe I could be loved before that and deserve to be loved. And it was something that took so long to be able to get to this point. And it's still a journey, and there's still times I struggle with it, but it wasn't instant. And I really want others to know that, because people have always thought, oh, Jenn, you're so confident. Yeah, that doesn't mean that I got all my shit together. That doesn't mean I always like feel that I'm worthy, or that my Spotify playlists are your top like 2021 playlist just came out, and I love it. It's all hype music, because when I was on this journey, I have songs that are all about being a badass and, like, I'm amazing. And I'm like, wow, if somebody looks at this playlist, I look like one of the most conceited people in the world. But it's because it made me go, I am worthy. And I just really want people to know that wasn't easy, and therapy and self-development is so worth it.
What can you identify something that helped specifically break through that wall of believing, no, I can't, to maybe I can?
I've always had this insatiable curiosity. It's something that annoys the heck out of those that are around me, because I ask why worse than a 2-year-old. And I want to know how it works and what's going on. And that always drove me to keep going, because cool, it's upset about something. Maybe I can figure out why if I go take this self-development course. And I always kept wanting to dig deeper and figure out the why and figure out how and figure out the what. And it was really like, as I'm going through all of these courses without meaning to, like, I never necessarily consciously made the decisions of listening to them and practicing it. But subconsciously, I clearly started listening, because it was like one day it just kind of clicked. It wasn't like I consciously made that change. It was, I'm going to surround myself with things of who I want to be, of where I want to go, and learn from people that are doing that. So that way, one day, and back then it was like one day I hope to get there. Now I know that actually does happen, and that's how to get there, because whether we consciously like register the information, a lot of times our subconscious, at least this is what I believe, I don't think there's any science behind it, but we start to register it. And it's kind of like that saying of, you are the 5 people you surround yourself with. You are the content that you consume. And I've always been like a self-help junkie. Not in the fact that I want to become one of those self-help cults and that kind of stuff. And I don't want to force everybody else to go through self-help stuff. It's more of just, that's who I am, because I'm so curious about humans. And it's knowing and being curious is really what helped change it. Is I saw other people being able to change their lives, that it just finally clicked.
Oh, that's amazing. And how do you see that contributing to your healing through with mental health?
That's a great question. I see it in, I have always had a really, really hard time with boundaries.
Okay.
Boundaries, I think, is one of the easiest ones that I can say like pinpoints for, especially at work. I've always been like, oh, my boss texted me, I got to get to it. Oh, my boss needs me at work, I got to get to it. And rearrange my entire schedule for my boss or for somebody else. Or, and it was when I started hearing boundaries come out of my mouth, I was like, wait, what was that? I just said that? Where did that come from? I didn't even know I knew that. Because instead of responding to my boss's text right away, I wouldn't look because I was off the clock. Instead of, especially with the podcast stuff, it sucks, but people don't always show up to record. And old me would have taken that really personally. And now I'm just like, meh, I'll give them like 5-10 minutes. And if they don't show up, fuck it. Like, I'll move on with life. And having those boundaries just magically appeared.
Right.
Not magically, because I've been doing all this work beforehand.
Right, exactly.
And
you've been putting a lot of effort.
Healing, and that's helping me heal, because now that I'm having these boundaries, I'm able to go, well, I'm going to dig in deep and do all this shit that I didn't want to do with therapy, because I'm protecting my energy elsewhere.
That's beautiful.
Thanks.
And you can really cultivate the garden of your life that you're growing and developing.
Yes. And if you asked me, like, even 5 years ago, if I thought that was possible, I would say you're insane. Like, I honestly, if even like 8-year-old me met me now, like, I don't know if I cussed when I was 8, but I'm pretty sure she'd be like, what the fuck? Like, that's not possible.
Right. So let me ask you this, kind of like jumping a little bit, is what would, if you had people who are listening who are in the mental health field right now, what would you want them to know or improve on based on your experiences? Because you said you've had over 20 therapists that were shitty. What would you want? What do you want the mental health field to know to be better?
That's a great question. Don't talk about yourself so much. I mean, that's my own personal experience. Like, and I find this in great teachers as well. And don't give the answers. So in a more positive light is, I would say, when with a client, if they're asking questions about you, use it to kindly redirect to them, because they could be deflecting.
Mm-hmm.
If they're going through something, please help them figure out the solution, not just send them with a bunch of research to go do the research themselves, like a bunch of books and a bunch of, that's not going to help. And if somebody says that they're in an abusive relationship, believe them.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell them it's their fault.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, especially for therapists that were around during some abusive relationships in my life, actually do your job to make sure I'm in a safe spot.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so many that don't, because they don't believe the client.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have been in a lot better place if they just did their job.
Mm-hmm.
So
Really good advice.
I mean, I feel like such a Debbie Downer, but be more like you and be more like my therapist. Like, is that a way to say it?
Oh my
Like,
God, yes, hashtag, yeah. Well, no, sometimes I
but
think I'm a talker, right? So I know sometimes in therapy I gotta like bring it in. That's what I love about EMDR though, is that you really, one of the phrases we learn in our training, or at least that I with my consultees, is take yourself out of it. And let the EMDR do the work. And it's so amazing because you're still there as the therapist. You're still creating that space. You're still holding that, and you're still teaching with psychoeducation and processing. But to help someone's brain create that connection is amazing and humbling and beautiful to be there of. Oh yeah, you don't need to see me for 6 years. You might need like 6 sessions, but you're gonna find the answers yourself. It's the coolest thing ever.
Yes, and 100%. And this is something that I've some of the greatest teachers in my life are ones that make me say, I hate you.
Mm-hmm.
And I say it like that, and they know I'm joking, because they're the ones that are asking the questions that make me think the hardest.
Right. I get told to F
And
off
then,
every once in a while.
yeah,
So I take
mean,
that as the
yeah, I'm pretty sure I told my therapist that, and she's like, so we're making progress, is what her reply. And I'm like, yeah, I guess.
I usually say something like, good work. We'll see you next week, same time, same channel.
Yeah. There's times where I'm like, especially with my work schedule, and I would say for therapists that can be flexible, because with my work schedule, I can't cry in the afternoon because I have work to do that evening. So I've texted my therapist and been like, yo, I can't cry today, so we need to move therapy. And she'll be like, okay. So
I do my best, but I think sometimes it's hard of like, but like you said, sometimes the tears might come, then it might be 3 days later when you're watching a Christmas movie. You never know when it's going to come.
That is true.
So how could people find you if they, in which I hope they do, to be able to listen to your podcast?
Yes, and then they can check out your episode and learn more about what you do too. On all the social medias, it is shit to talk about, and that is shit, the number 2, talk about. And it's also the website, shitstalkabout.com. And the podcast is called Shit You Don't Want to Talk About, and shit is spelt with an exclamation point.
Awesome. And so people could just connect and follow and be able to enjoy all of the amazing work you're doing to bring to light a lot of these really important issues, which people may not even know what they are, but know that there is something there. And it sounds like you are connecting and using your experiences to bring people together in a really healing way.
Yes. And thank you. And yeah, tweet me, DM me, come comment on YouTube, let's get this, table to grow bigger and be the biggest table in the entire world.
Love it. So before we end, I have one last question for you that I love to ask my guests. What is one piece of advice that you would like the listeners or the viewers to walk away from this episode? What is something you would like them to walk away with?
to ask questions before you judge.
Hmm.
And that includes to yourself.
Ooh, I love
Because a lot of times I've seen where I am judging someone and it's because it's rubbing me the wrong way because I haven't worked through something and asking myself internally why.
That's golden. That's really
Thank
good.
you.
That would be a good show. Maybe you'll have to come back and we'll pick up from there. Ooh, judgment. That would be a good topic.
Well,
You know
we're
what?
both talkers.
I'm having a
so
vision.
I'm down.
I think pulling together a little panel and having a great discussion on judgment would be fantastic.
I'm down. Keep me posted.
I will. So thank you so much, Jenn, for coming and joining us. It's been amazing. I think you're doing beautiful work, and I can't wait to hear more about your podcast in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick. Thanks
Sure.
for having me on the show.
Awesome. And thank you everyone for watching or listening. Remembering Friday Night Feels is now on YouTube and also on the platforms for podcasts. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Have a beautiful weekend, everyone. Bye.